Fascinating place to visit even today. How many have been to this part of the world? Right, we have a few that have been up or to Jerusalem. We want to come back here 2,000 years ago to Herod's temple. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of Herod the Great. He becomes famous for the Christmas story, the king who tried to kill the baby Jesus, if you recall. Herod was a real person. It was Herod who actually rebuilt this temple over many years, number of years. But Herod did a lot of building in ancient Israel. For example, this is the famous aqueduct that you can see on the Mediterranean Sea. It brought water to this great city here of the Romans that was on the Mediterranean called Caesarea. In fact, that's Herod's palace, what's left of it here in the picture here. Herod the Great was an incredible builder. This is not the only place that things that he built. Herod had a number of fortresses. This one is the Herodian near Bethlehem. This is probably the place where the soldiers came to kill the children in Bethlehem on that tragic night. Not so far across into Jordan, you see, down on the Dead Sea, down south, you see the fortress of Masada. Masada was an incredible fortress overlooking the Dead Sea area. He even had another fortress, this one's in Jordan, called Macarius. Here at Macarius is where John the Baptist was beheaded. You've heard of John the Baptist. Herod had a number of fortresses because Herod had a lot of enemies. Herod was a good friend of Caesar Augustus. I'm sure you've heard of him. Caesar Augustus once said, "It's better to be Herod's pig than Herod's son," because Herod killed his wife, he killed some kids. He was a shocking sort of a person. He was afraid that people would take his throne, and so he had people killed as well. So this is the Herod we're talking about. It was into Herod's temple that we find the stories where Jesus comes often. If you've read the New Testament, this is the place where he comes to. One day he's showing his followers are showing him around this temple, a little tiki tour of the temple, if you would, and looking at some of its magnificent structures. And Jesus said these words to them. I'm going to read them. He said to them, "Do you not see all these things, this magnificent place?" It's one of the most spectacular buildings in the ancient world of the Romans at this time. The Romans actually helped to build it. "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now you can imagine the followers of Jesus hearing those words. They must have been dumbstruck. Not one stone left upon another. So a little while later they came up here to the Mount of Olives, from which we're taking this picture, and we're looking back over to the city of Jerusalem. By the way, this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This was one that an Australian guy tried to burn, I should say, a few years ago. Fortunately, he didn't do it. He tried to, but they caught him before he could. And this is where the temple once stood in the time of Jesus, in this area here. So they're overlooking this city, and notice the question his followers asked him while they're sitting up here on this hill or this mountain. "Tell us, when will these things be? When's this going to happen that the temple will not be left with one stone upon another?" Jesus then gave a series of predictions concerning Jerusalem, the temple, and the Jewish nation. And you're going to see why we're going to talk about these in a short while. Why are we mentioning these? Well, remember, these are predictions of Jesus of Nazareth that he makes. All right. Number one, he said Jerusalem would be surrounded by an embankment, a wall, and it would be destroyed, he said. Here's the prediction. Now, as he drew near, by the way, this is a few days before this, he's actually coming into Jerusalem. He's still on the Mount of Olives and overlooking the city. As he drew near, he saw the city and he wept over it, saying, "Days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you and close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground." So there's his prediction. By the way, we know these predictions were made before the destruction of Jerusalem, because these are in the Gospels, and we know when the Gospels were written, before the destruction of Jerusalem. Number 2, the temple would be totally destroyed, he predicted. Let's notice the prediction. We just saw it a moment ago, remember? Not one stone here will be left on another. Now, this is quite an incredible prediction, because we now know how big some of these stones were that actually made up the temple platform on which the temple was built, for example. You can see this lady here standing in front of one of these stones. By the way, this is a Herodian stone. The typical Herodian stones, in other words, Herod had his workmen do it, is this little bevel here, all around his stones. Some of these stones in the temple platform, you can see 20 metres long, 2 metres wide and 3 metres high. That's a piece of stone, isn't it? In fact, underneath the Temple Mount, it's part of the structure that's holding the whole thing up on top. You can see these massive stones that would go from here to the back of the room. Massive stones that were used. Not saying all this temple was built of stones that big, but there were some mighty big pieces of rock up here on this temple. Number 3, the Jews would fall by the sword, Jesus predicted. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They shall fall by the sword, tragically. Number 4 prediction, the Jews would be scattered among the nations, Jesus predicted. Notice his prediction here. He continued, they will fall by the sword, will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. And finally, he made this prediction, that the Gentiles, that's the non-Jewish people, they would inhabit the city of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. In the Bible, that's a reference to the end times. So this is going to go on. It's going to be inhabited by Gentiles right until the end. Now, were these predictions fulfilled? That's the question. Well, let's have a look at what we find. Those are the predictions in the Bible. Now let's trace what actually took place. We come to the time of Gessius Florus. He's a Roman commander in charge of the Roman soldiers at Jerusalem. You see, what would happen? The Romans ruled Jerusalem, we said, or Palestine, from Caesarea. But when there were special Jewish festivals, they'd come up with more soldiers because of trouble may occur. Because the Jews were one of the hardest places for the Romans to keep under control. They fiercely wanted their independence. And so there's a group of soldiers, of course, always stationed up there, but they're under Gessius Florus. He decides to take a temple tax from the Jews. He wants to take some gold and silver because of the privilege of having the Romans look after them, sort of thing. They rebelled and said, no way, and so they massacred the Roman garrison up there in Jerusalem. This is just 35 years after Jesus had said these words, 66 AD. Well, the Romans weren't going to take that sitting down, so they sent a commander with lots of soldiers called Cestius Gallus down to Jerusalem to put down this revolt, because now the Jews are in control of Jerusalem for the first time for many years. Cestius Gallus surrounds the city. He's really got the Jews, in control. He's doing well, and suddenly he mysteriously withdraws his soldiers. We're not sure why he did that, but he withdrew his soldiers. The Jewish soldiers inside the city, they chased after them, had a big fight down the road, which Cestius Gallus lost. But some of the Jewish Christians who were living in Jerusalem at this time remembered some warning words that Jesus had given. He had said 35 years before, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation or destruction is imminent. So then run for your life. But how are you going to run for your life when the city's surrounded by army? Not going to be able to do it. So the Christians recognized as soon as the Romans left and the Jews chased after them, this is what Jesus is saying, let's get out of here. So they escaped after Cestius Gallus withdrew, and they came over here to Pella in Jordan. Pella is famous for Australians because for many years now the Sydney University has been excavating this place, and this is where the Christians fled to at this time. Well, after Cestius Gallus, his forces are defeated, the Romans sent another guy called Vespasian. Now Vespasian, he comes to Palestine and he attacks the cities around and the towns, but he lets the people escape in one direction, Jerusalem. So finally he's got everybody holed up in Jerusalem. He can deal with them all properly there. But before he goes to attack the city of Jerusalem, Nero dies, that infamous Roman emperor. He dies, and Vespasian goes back to Rome, and he's made the emperor. He puts his son in charge of the campaign against the Jews, and it's Titus who besieges the city of Jerusalem 4 years after the start of this fight with the Jews in 70 AD. What does Titus do? Titus starves the Jewish people living inside the city. How does he do it? He builds a 5-mile earthen rampart or a wall right around Jerusalem. What did Jesus say 39 years before now, nearly 40 years? They're going to do this. They're going to build a wall around this city. Josephus, Peter mentioned Josephus, this Jewish historian who actually fought the Romans for a while in this very war and then changed sides and joined the Romans. Josephus reports that some 1 million Jews perished in the siege. It was a bloodbath. Terrible destruction went on in Jerusalem. The Jews, of course, have suffered terribly right on down through the ages. I remember a few years ago, just before COVID-19, we visited Auschwitz here, and Jews come here in droves to remember the terrible Holocaust where many of their people suffered. And tragically, Jewish people have suffered down through the ages at the hands of various people through time. Jesus was actually correct of the sufferings that took place for these people. Now, this fortress here, it's circled by red, this is known as the Fortress of Antonia. The Romans built this fortress right here so that it could overlook the temple, because they knew this structure here was the center of Jewish nationalism and pride. And if there was ever going to be a big fight, if it would ever end, it would end here. And if it would ever start, this is probably where it would start, because this is their number one place. So they built a fortress overlooking it. Well, as the Romans start to get control of the city under Titus, finally they take Antonia, and the next thing is this. Titus warns his soldiers, don't destroy this temple. This is one of the most magnificent and costly structures on the planet under our control. But in the fighting, someone threw a firebrand here when the Jews made their last stand, and the whole thing went up in smoke. And when the fires had gone out, the Romans literally tore the temple apart to get the gold and the silver that ran down between the cracks of the rocks of those stones that had made up the temple. And so they pulled the whole temple apart, and you can actually see what archaeologists have excavated. Here is the rubble. These massive stones have been thrown down from on top, everything's smashed up. But you see, this is the level of the street today where you walk, and the archaeologists have been excavating all down in this whole area here. And this, you can see where the stones have smashed into the pavement. These are the shops where they would have changed money and so on, for the people to go up onto the temple in the time of Jesus. So the archaeologists have discovered that. And when you visit the Temple Mount today, it's flat, except for these Islamic buildings that have been put here much later, around 700, 800 AD. Just incredibly, as Jesus said, not one stone left upon another. And as Peter mentioned this morning, the Arch of Titus, the victory arch for this great fight against the Jews, that Titus had this arch. Underneath you saw those soldiers carrying away the 7-branched candlestick from the temple. Exactly as Jesus had predicted, one by one these things were being fulfilled. And there's no Jewish temple today in Jerusalem. That's the building that stands there. It's a third most holy place for Muslims today, is this site. Now, when 100 years later, roughly, well, 60 years I should say, 60, 70 years later, Emperor Hadrian's the emperor, the Jews revolted yet again in what is called the Bar Kokhba revolt, and Hadrian said, had enough, got to get rid of these people out of this place, and so the Jews were driven from Palestine, many of them, and scattered all around the world. And that's where we find Jews today. There are more people, more Jews living in great cities like New York, London, Moscow, and other places around the world than are actually living in what we call Israel today. Incredible predictions Jesus made of how these people would be scattered around the world. And of course, the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, inhabit Jerusalem today and have for many years. You can visit Jerusalem and you will find there's a quarter for the Armenians. They're not Jewish people. There's a Christian quarter. There's an Arab quarter. And then there's a Jewish quarter. Most of Jerusalem today, including the temple area itself, is occupied by non-Jewish people. In fact, the Palestinian Arabs control this very important area. The most sacred area for the Jews today is controlled by the Arabs. You can see Jesus, when he made predictions, he got them exactly right. So what's the point? The point of sharing these predictions is this, that this same Jesus who made those predictions which are spot on also gave incredible predictions on the island of Patmos. It was Jesus, according to John, who gave the prophecies that we see in the book of Revelation. And that's why we want to talk about these now, because you're going to have the privilege to be able to be looking at some of these predictions coming up. And I want to point you to some of them. So let's go to the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. It was a penal colony in the days of John, who was one of the followers of Jesus. And he was sent to this place because they tried to cook him in oil back on the mainland of what we would call Turkey today, and he wouldn't cook. He wouldn't, it should have killed him, but he came out of that, so they sent him here to this penal colony. Now, when you come here today, most people come to visit the cave of the Apocalypse or the Revelation. We can't be sure where it was, but people come from all over the world to come to this place, this cave, where it said that John wrote the book of Revelation. But somewhere on this island, John was given these incredible visions that have predictions dealing with the very time in which we're living. Predictions that show us very clearly that we're on the knife edge of eternity. In the middle of the book, John sees Earth's final events, the final events of planet Earth as it is today. Notice what he sees in the center of this book. He sees three evil powers who combine together. A dragon who pulls the strings behind the scene, a sea beast, and a land beast. Together, these three beasts form what we could call a global world order. Notice what John says. Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he exercised all the authority of the first beast. And then it says, all the world marveled and followed the beast. That's the one from the sea. So you can see this is a pretty incredible picture that we have. Three powers working together in the end of time. So how do these three powers, how are they going to control the whole world? What's going to play out here? Notice what the Bible says. First of all, it says that there will be economic and financial pressure brought on the people in the world to control them, to toe the line. Let's notice the words. We're not going to introduce you to these characters, who they are. You'll have to come to the seminar because we can't cover everything. But I want you to see where we're heading today. He, that's the land beast, causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark. Now watch what happens. A mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and that no one may buy or sell. If I can force you not to be able to buy or sell, I got some economic muscle, right? Someone's got some economic clout here. Except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Second way that people are going to be controlled. So firstly, through the back pocket or your handbag, you know what I mean. Economic pressure is going to be brought to bear on people. Won't be able to buy or sell. Second one is physical coercion. He was granted, the Bible says, to cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be what? To be killed. That's physical coercion. So for some people, it's going to be the threat of death to try to get them to toe the line. So what's the purpose of this global control? What's the aim? What's the objective? Notice the objective that John spells out. It is global worship or allegiance. That may surprise us, but hang in here and we'll show you some interesting things that he says. Notice what the Bible says. All the world marveled and they followed the beast, so they worshipped the dragon. That's a religious word, right? Who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast. That's the sea beast. He, now it's talking of the land beast, he causes the earth and those who dwell in it to what? To worship the first beast. Worship, worship, worship is going to be the key issue in the end of time, surprisingly. And what's going to be the result of global control? What will be the end product, or one of the key things that will take place after this attempt to control people? Surprisingly, it's going to be a global economic meltdown. Notice what the Bible says. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn, for no one buys their merchandise. This is talking about the financiers, the people who produce stuff and so on. No one buys their merchandise anymore, for in 1 hour such great riches come to nothing. Not going to be worth anything. Something's going to take place on planet Earth. Now, question here, is this really coming, or is this just a nice fairy tale that John sort of puts in the Bible to make us get all scared or something? What's the point of all this? Is it really going to take place? Well, as we said, we can't cover everything. It's just we don't have the time, but you'll have that opportunity coming up very shortly. So let's talk about some things that show us, yes, we're actually moving in this direction on our planet. I want to talk about globalism. By that we mean the world is a global village, not in a number of ways. Number one, economically we today are a global village. We'll see that more in a moment. Culturally, because of the fact that now, just look at this room here this afternoon. We are from so many different cultures, and that's happening everywhere on the planet because the world is becoming just so interconnected more these days. Technologically, we are a global village. Sociologically, because of the movements of people. Medically, we saw that just a few months back, the last couple of years, right? Right around the world, we're connected in this way as well, in many different ways. Spiritually, there is so much interconnection going on today. Now, I want to talk about globalization, because this is just one part of this global village. By globalization, we're talking about the world being a global economic village, because this is very easy for us to see. Thomas Friedman, I have his book at home. It's a fascinating book because in this book, Friedman is talking about the factors that have driven us to be a global economic village where we're all so connected. Now, this is a bit of history, quick, from Thomas Friedman. He, by the way, was writing for New York Times and quite a writer, this gentleman. He talked about the first factor was the democratization of technology. By this, what does he mean? He means, listen, thanks to the technology we have today, we are so connected right around the planet. We just, doesn't matter where you live. You can be grandma living here in Vic Park, and you can sell icy poles to an Eskimo up in Lapland somewhere just with a little computer in your home, right? You can do that today. That's what he's talking about. The democratization. Everybody has access to this technology around the planet. If you don't believe me, if few years ago, I was running some meetings out in Bougainville, and we were travelling from the port right into the middle of the island somewhere. We've been going probably 2 or 3 hours, and they decided to have a toilet break. So we get out of the truck, and everybody scatters with their mobile phones and connects with people everywhere out in the back blocks of Papua New Guinea. That's what we're talking about. It's a smartphone, you can do just about anything, right? Number 2, the democratization of finances, he says, which means, hey, it's easy to get access to money today. You say, come on, give me a break, I can't get money. It's very easy. Just go to a shop and anywhere and ask for a credit card. That's a small loan. In other words, he's saying you can get money easier today to buy the stuff to connect to the world. That's what he's really driving at. It's much easier to get your hands. Even if you don't have any money, they'll give you money. As long as they can grab something at the end. Number 3, the democratization of information. What does he mean by that? He means you can't stop information from flowing. It's very hard. There's no bamboo or iron curtains. Oh yeah, they try to shut down your smartphones and all sorts of stuff and try to control. But information gets out much more easy today than in the past, thanks to, of course, the scientific technological revolution that we've all experienced. You know, you can, can't you? If you're a soccer fan, you can sit here in Vic Park and watch your favourite soccer team in Outer Mongolia play if you want to live, if they're filming it, just because of all this stuff. So that's what he's saying. That's what's driven us to be this way in an economic setting. Now he says there are serious consequences, however, to the fact that we are a global economic village. 2 of them. Number 1, there is the opportunity for global economic control now, because we are connected like we are economically. And isn't that a very readily obviously thing? This is an obvious thing. Now think about what John said. He said, as we near the end of time, these 3 powers, you won't be able to buy, you won't be able to sell unless you take the mark of the beast, whatever that is, and you'll understand what that is. We're not going to get into that. Just as John predicted 2,000 years ago, we've come to a time when somebody or some group or some country can actually control others economically. The potential is there. Number 2, the possibility of global economic collapse, because, hey, one player can pull the others down. Haven't we heard of that? 2008, GFC, America catches an economic cold, sneezes, and the rest of the world got it. Remember all the bailout packages? It was pretty good. What did we get? A couple of hundred, maybe a couple of $1,000? The Prime Minister gave everybody back of those years. Maybe you didn't get it, but some others did. But, you know, that's what happened. One player can actually help bring others down because of this. And John says, we just read, there's coming a day when there will be a global economic meltdown. It's uncanny when you think about it that John writes at a time when we certainly weren't connected globally. We certainly didn't have anything like what we've got today, but somebody gave him insights as to what would be taking place down in the end of time. What about physical coercion? Well, what about COVID-19? Please, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising any governments on the planet. I'm just simply making it a point. Right around the world there was coercion put on citizens of all countries because the countries were trying to protect the health of their people. All right? So we can see these things. And if you had to live back in Nazi Germany or in Soviet Russia, you would have realised this is obviously very possible for governments to do. So this is not unrealistic. Now, is it realistic that Earth's final events will impact the spiritual sphere of life? Is that possible, the idea of worship? Or is that just, come on, that's some religious crankpots, namely John? Well, have a think again. Sir Arnold J. Toynbee, now passed away, one of the greatest historians we've had in modern times, he was a London University and Oxford University historian. He wrote a mammoth set of books called A Study of History, where he examined 21 world civilisations. In one of his volumes, volume 5, which I have myself at home. In fact, I had the lot, but there's such a big, I thought, I'm not going to read these things. Let me just keep the one that's really important to me. But in number 5 volume, he talks about why civilizations disintegrate and collapse. How come the Aztecs have gone? How come the ancient Egyptian civilizations collapsed? Why did these civilizations collapse? And he gives a number of reasons, which we're not going to get into. But in the course of his work, notice what this man says. The fundamental conflict is not political, but religious. As he examines all different civilizations, it says the fundamental conflict is not political but religious. The line cuts across the inward spiritual world within every living soul today. Whatever label of political citizenship may have been stamped on its body by the accident of birth. Is Toynbee correct? Have a think about some of the most recent conflicts in our planet. How about this one? Northern Ireland. What was it really about? Catholic against Protestant. What if we go to Bosnia, Serbia and Croatia back in the, early 90s? Muslims, Orthodox Christians and Catholic Christians. How about we come up here to terrorism today? Usually, but not exclusively, terrorist Muslims, jihadi and so on. How about Kashmir, right up there in the Himalayan mountains? This is about Muslims versus Hindus. Fundamental part of the conflict. And then finally, what about Israel and the Middle East? Well, let me tell you, this is about Orthodox Jews, extremely Orthodox Jews especially, who help fuel this thing. Protestants from the United States of America who believe America must support Israel, and therefore they support Israel more than the Palestinians, and of course Muslims. Toynbee was right. And John in the book of Revelation made it very clear that as we near the end of time, we're going to see that worship will become the central focus. So maybe it's a surprise to you, but it's not a surprise to people who actually look at history and as we look at the prophecies. Now, in the programs to come that you're going to be having here in Vic Park, you're going to be able to understand who these 3 powers are: the dragon, the sea beast, the land beast. You're going to understand what the mark of the beast is. You'll understand this business of 666, and it's very important because Jesus gave these things to John. You'll also understand things like the world's greatest battle, the Battle of Armageddon. The reason these things are important in the Bible is because, and Peter alluded to it, why does God share these things in the Bible? Not so we can have our curiosity satisfied, but so that as these things begin to take place, we might believe. In the book of Isaiah that Peter mentioned, he mentioned Cyrus. It was predicted that he would take the city of Babylon from the Babylonians, the Medo-Persian leader, as the leader. Isaiah says why God does this, so that you might know that I am God, so that the world will look to me and be saved. God wants us to be part of that last world empire that Peter talked about in our last presentation. So we've shared this with you this afternoon so you can see very clearly where the Bible is heading. God is wanting to help the planet today. And he makes these incredible predictions so long ago, and they line up in an incredible way that help us to know, hey, we're on the right track here. Peter, I think you're the last man to present. Oh, we are. We're going to have a break too, I think, because people after lunch tend to go to sleep, Peter. I usually do some exercises at this point in the program, get people to stand up and stretch. But I think we'll give you a 5-minute break, okay? 5 minutes. Then we're going to come back again. And Peter has the last presentation. Incredible. Global warnings. How we know the last empire is very near.
And Peter will be taking the next session. But before Peter comes up, Shirey is going to be singing a song for us. And I hope you enjoy it. So I'll invite Shirey over. And as you walk over to your chairs, please, Shirey, come forward, please. Thank you.
Open up your heart and invite him to come. Thank you for that beautiful music. All right. Are you still alive out there? You're still hanging in. It's been a longish day, but I hope that you felt that it's been value. And I'm going to present the final of, tell you what we'll do, is if I put that up there, could you freeze the screen for me? That'd be great. There you go. And so I can just change this over. But I'm going to present the final presentation for today, and it's called Global Warnings. And though this is the final presentation for the day, it is not the end of the journey, because we are going to be presenting more topics in this vein over the next few weeks. We have a brochure that we want you to take with you when you go from this place about a series that I'm beginning next Friday here at Victoria Park, and we'll talk more about that at the end. So make sure you get that brochure as you leave today. So I'm going to talk about global warnings, and what we're going to do is try to pull together some of these threads that we've been talking about and see where we are today. You know, there are a lot of people who are concerned about where the world is and where the world is heading. How many of you have heard of the Doomsday Clock? Yeah, it's published by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and so this is nothing to do with religion. This is really scientific people who are looking at the state of the world, and they're trying to anticipate